Thank you very much, Andrew, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you all. As Andrew mentioned, I am the Humanists at Risk Coordinator for Humanists International. So my role is to support individuals who reach out to us who are being persecuted for their non-religious beliefs and or their advocacy of humanist values. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my work and what it's been like to support individuals at risk. Particularly, I'd like to look a little bit at the patterns of persecution that we see for the non-religious, the kind of requests that we receive, who we actually support, who are the people reaching out to us, how do we support them, and what help have we provided? And at the end, there'll be time for question and answers. So I could talk about this for hours, honestly, but I have about 30 minutes, so I will be as concise as possible. But if I miss anything, there's space for questions at the end. Please feel free to ask them. My role developed as a result of the increase in cases that we have been receiving since about 2015, especially with the rise of attacks on Bangladeshi bloggers in particular. And it's part of the recognition of the organisation and our membership, and a commitment from our membership to support individuals at risk and to do so in a systematic way, that my role has been created. So my job has been to systematise the process, to put in place policies, procedures, and new ways of working. So let's first turn to patterns of persecution. Well, we know from our experience dealing with individuals at risk, as well as our own research, that non-religious individuals face bullying, isolation, ostracism, discrimination as a result of their non-religious beliefs. Discrimination can be in the forms of limited access to jobs, to positions in government, for example. And isolation bullying, it can be in the home, or it can be from outside. So there's a real breadth of where the persecution takes place, which is quite different from other human rights activists or other groups that might be also being persecuted. We find also that many of the individuals who reach out to us are facing an actual physical attack. And one of the things that comes with that is a cycle of impunity. And the reason that impunity is so dangerous is because it creates a cycle in which would-be assailants are emboldened to carry out further attacks. And this isn't just a phenomenon within attacks on the non-religious. This can be across the entire human rights spectrum. Activists across the world are targeted, they are attacked, and there is a failure by governments to hold those to account. So that's also something that we look at. And finally, I think one of the most important things to raise is blasphemy. Some of those who reach out to us have actually been accused of blasphemy and are facing charges. The majority of the people who reach out to me and who write to me are actually those who fear blasphemy allegations. They fear being accused by their friends, by their family, by their colleagues, even by people on social media if they are exposed, and the heavy penalties that they carry. I can give you an example. For example, Mashal Khan in 2017, a young student in Pakistan, was beaten to death by a group of students after he wrote on Facebook that he was a humanist. There has been an investigation in this case. It's one of the few where it's actually been conducted. But what we've seen is that while several were convicted, we've later seen that they were then released. There were 26 people who were eventually acquitted. But what that's done is created a climate of fear, which has led to self-censorship, which we cannot overestimate the damage to individuals' well-being that has. So the requests for assistance, where do they come from? This map I've created to show you the requests that we've received since I really started this work for the organisation in June of 2020. As you can see, one of the biggest offenders here is Pakistan. We've had 50 requests from individuals from Pakistan seeking assistance. The majority of the remainder come from the Middle East and North Africa and countries in Asia. To give you a bit of a closer list, here you can see the top cases: Pakistan, Egypt, Iran, Morocco. Afghanistan is one that I'd particularly like to raise because I suspect we're going to receive a considerable number more cases as the peace deal has broken down and the Taliban is is growing in power once more. Who are these people? Well, as you can see, the requests that we receive, 82% of them are men. Now, this could be that men are more persecuted, generally speaking. That could be the case. It could be true. However, I suspect that there's something else going on here. And while this is only speculation, I would like to raise it. And that's that behind this gender disparity is that the worst countries for freedom of religion or belief and for the non-religious are often also the worst countries for women. And so they face a double discrimination. On the one hand, patriarchal society and systemic oppression, and on the other hand, harmful religious practices. And so they face additional barriers even to accessing support. Women who do reach out to me, they report often that they are being forced into marriage, that they are facing domestic violence, that they're facing familial pressure to conform. They report that they don't actually have access to a computer on a regular basis, their own personal computer. A sibling has lent them their telephone and they're not sure if it's going to be seen again. They're not sure if they're going to have access again. So sometimes when they reach out to me, they're not sure if they're ever going to be in contact with me again. And that's the difference there. I don't tend to receive that kind of a request from a man. A man who reaches out to me normally has their own computer or their own telephone and just says to me, I need your help, and they'll respond. So I suspect that that's what's at play there, and that it's not that women in general, non-religious women are not being persecuted. In terms of religious background, I think that it's possibly not surprising to many of us that 73% of those who reach out to us are from a Muslim religious background. And I think that's down to the harsh penalties for blasphemy in those countries. But I do want to just dwell upon the 20% that are unknown here, because that would seem weird, I'm sure, to all of you. And that's because when individuals reach out to me, they don't automatically always tell me what their religious background is. And I'll never presume what the answer is. I wait for them to tell me. And in some cases, they never get back to me, they don't respond, so we don't know, and we never know. And in other cases, they do. And when that happens, we update the statistics. But for me, it's really important to include that unknown, because otherwise all of these figures would be skewed for you and the perception would be very different. So here you can see the progression of the requests that we've received from June 2020 up to now. In fact, actually, this figure is already wrong. I produced these slides earlier on this week, and this number has already grown. I can't tell you exactly what it is right now, but it's certainly 260, I would say. Those who reach out to us, as you can see, the majority of them are seeking support with asylum or UNHCR claims and or relocation. Relocation is one of the hardest things to do to support someone, especially in a pandemic, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Others seek financial support, they might seek legal support. This could be because they're facing prosecution, or often it's because they're appealing an asylum claim. Many are also seeking advice. So what has been the impact? Well, for those of you who have read the Freedom of Thought report, you will see that from last year, there were lots of countries and lots of groups within society in those countries that saw the pandemic as being a punishment from God and a punishment for sin, with the ultimate sinners being the non-religious. And so what we've seen is harsher discrimination and scapegoating of the non-religious. They have been blamed for the pandemic. We've also seen that these individuals haven't been able to escape in a way that they normally might, even internally in their own country. They haven't been able to leave their homes or leave their town to go somewhere where they might be safer because they're not known, let alone travel abroad hundreds, thousands of miles, because embassies are closed, borders are shut, flights aren't running. So they're stuck at home. And there's two things here. For those who are being targeted by those in the outside world rather than in the familial domain, when the pandemic hit and lockdowns happened across the world, whilst they may have felt very much at risk, they were actually at less risk than they had been before. And that's because everyone was subject to the same legislation, the same rules. Everyone had to stay indoors. So their would-be assailants couldn't come and get them. And now, as things ease, as restrictions ease, they are becoming at increased risk because their would-be assailants are now able to go out, but these individuals aren't very sure if it's safe, and they're still not able to flee in quite the same way that they might have done otherwise. But for those where the persecution is in the home, they have been at increased risk because they have to pretend. They have to pretend for their own safety with their families that they do still follow religious beliefs and practices. They've had to pray during lockdown. They've had to observe Ramadan, for example. And this has had a really detrimental effect on their well-being. So many of the people who've reached out to me, unfortunately, have been suffering quite considerably from mental health difficulties as a result, and quite understandably so. I just also want to touch upon those who are in prison and those who were in prison when the pandemic hit. We have a number of cases that we've been working on for a very long time who are imprisoned as a result of their humanist advocacy. They are kept in conditions which are very harsh, they are overcrowded, there is limited concern for their welfare, if any at all. And this environment is conducive to the spread of disease. And if they were to contract COVID, their immune systems are already hampered and they're less likely to be able to get the medical attention they need. So it's something that we've been really concerned about and have been following closely. It's really important that we remember that there are people behind these statistics, behind these numbers that I'm giving you now. And these are only a few of them that I can talk about publicly with you all. They have families, they have lives, they are passionate, activist individuals who care about their societies, and they are being targeted. Here you can see just a snapshot of those we can talk about publicly, those that are active and some that we've worked on and that now we are no longer working on, usually because they're safe. You can find this on our Cases of Concern archive on our website. I really recommend you go and take a look. There you can download briefings on their cases. You can see what we've been doing on their cases and what you might be able to do to support them as well. I use the term casework all the time and the term protection, and I want to make sure that we have a common understanding of what that is. So for us, protection and casework is a common thread across all of our work, although it might not be the exclusive focus of any stream of work. Let me give you a bit more information about what I mean by that. So our membership, for a start. We have members across the globe. Here you can see a map of all of them at a current time. They themselves are activists. We support many projects across the globe through our Growth and Development Fund to help them to promote humanism in their own countries. They also receive requests for assistance. Many of them, where they are able to, where they have capacity, provide support. In some cases, this is really intense support in terms of helping with asylum claims, in terms of having an emergency hotline, for example, or providing legal support. In others, it might be something that might be seemingly superficial, but actually shouldn't be overlooked. And that's solidarity. That's bringing them into the network, making these individuals who have been so isolated feel part of something again, feel connected, and even giving them basic advice: where to find a mobile telephone, where is the best place to buy the cheapest food that's good. You know, those simple things are so important, and they're things that our membership do on a regular basis. But then there are lots of requests that they can't handle. And that's for lots of reasons. It might be that their own capacity, they're volunteers and they aren't able to address these requests. Or it could be that they're not in the right country, they're not in the best position to help. That's when those requests come to me. And so that's in addition to the requests that I receive anyway. It's also important, as I said before, to recognize that our members are activists. And they are at risk themselves, often, for the work that they do. So we provide support to our members when they are at risk, helping them in whatever way is most appropriate at that time for them. In the future, something I would really love to do is to produce much more resources for our membership and for humanists at risk around protection, around how to support an individual at risk, but also around how to protect yourself. As we mentioned earlier, we have done a funding bid where we're hoping to be able to deliver trainings to our members in security, in their own security, in their physical, digital, psychosocial security, so that instead of having to help people relocate, we can help them on the ground to protect themselves and to be able to stay where they're most needed. So that's a little bit about what we do with our membership. It also cross-cuts our advocacy work. Here you can see the wonderful Qasem delivering a statement at the UN on our behalf. We take cases and raise them at the international stage. And this is really important for them because it gives a level of scrutiny that affords them a level of safety often. But what it also does is humanize issues that sometimes can unfortunately appear incredibly dry, and people don't always understand why they matter. So by bringing these cases to the UN, by even getting them to speak about their own experience, as we have done with Sheikh, for example, we are able to tap into people's understanding in a different way that isn't just purely legalistic, but actually is about the lived experience. We also provide trainings to government officials, to parliamentarians on the right to freedom of religion or belief, helping them to understand the right in its full entirety so that the rights of the non-religious are properly understood and that their cases are taken more seriously. Here you can see a map of the End Blasphemy Laws campaign. We've been running this campaign along with our members since 2015. And here you see the map of legal provisions that are in existence across the globe since 2015, where green have been repealed since we started the campaign, but the darkest colours here, the deep red, where the punishment is death. And I think if we were to track this map onto the map of the requests we receive, we'd see a great deal of correlation between the highest level of punishment and the number of requests that I receive for assistance. On this website, we also talk about cases of concern. We share with our other members, with other organizations that are also interested in blasphemy, but might not have heard about our specific cases. So we can raise greater awareness about the issues. It's also fundamental to our research. It's a foundation stone of our research. For those of you who don't know, I imagine that's few in this audience, the Freedom of Thought Report examines each country's record of upholding the rights of the non-religious. I use it on a daily basis to help me prioritize cases, to help me understand who might be most at risk at this moment so that I can really look to support them first. Given the number of cases that we have, unfortunately, I have to prioritize. There is one of me and 250 something of them. But also, I use it to inform letters of support to those individuals when it comes to asylum claims, for example. It's used as a reference point by other organizations or even by governments when assessing asylum claims. We also use our casework to inform the Freedom of Thought Report. There we can include testimonies from individuals. The Freedom of Thought Report on its own is quite legal and doesn't really give you a sense of the lived experience. So by including individuals' testimonies, you can then say, this is the legal structure, this is how it affects that individual on the ground. And that is so valuable. And on the right here, you see the Humanists at Risk Action Report. We published this in June last year. I hope one day we can publish more with more funding. I think it's a really valuable resource and I encourage you all to look at it and maybe even look at replicating it in your own country. The report itself looked at the lived experience of individuals on the ground in 8 countries across the globe. And it largely relied on eyewitness testimony, but was supplemented by the Freedom of Thought Report research. And again, it's about contextualizing and helping people understand what is going on the ground. And then finally, there's the direct support, which I think is probably the most frequently associated with casework and protection. And that's the work that I focus quite heavily on. It could be individual campaigns, for example, that we provide for individuals either publicly or privately. It might be emergency grants that I'll talk about in a little bit. Signposting. So much of my work is about directing individuals to organizations that are better placed to help them. Sometimes there's an overlap of mandates. It might be an atheist journalist has reached out to me, and I'm able to put them in touch with a journalist organization with much bigger resources who can help them, so that I can focus on another individual who might not be able to benefit from another person's or another organization's help. Again, networking, solidarity, putting people in touch with local people on the ground who can support them, who can welcome them and embrace them, or even online. So many of these individuals aren't even aware of the online communities that are available to them. And then there's asylum support and relocation, perhaps the hardest work that I have to do and the most resource intensive, because the threshold for evidence of personal persecution is so high that very few of our cases, unfortunately, meet that threshold. The amount of evidence that is needed to prove that you are being persecuted because of your non-religious belief is really high, and so little is understood about the persecution of the non-religious. There's not been that much research, apart from the research that we really produce. And the effect of that is that governments don't tend to take their experiences as seriously as our non-religious counterparts. So whereas perhaps a Christian would not be told that they should return home and they could just pretend, a non-religious individual will be told that, and has been told that on a number of occasions in the cases that I've worked on. They've been told, you'll be safe if you go home and just pretend. What's the problem? The problem is they're not living true to their values, and that should be understood. Relocation has been nigh on impossible this year, largely, as I've already discussed, but it is something that individuals seek support with. Emergency grants. We provide up to £1,500 per person per year in order to support individuals' basic needs. We don't have to provide the full grant. We could provide only a small amount. We could give it out in stages, for example, but it can cover any kind of need, from legal, relocation, often medical, or shelter. Many of the individuals who've reached out to us over the last year have been stuck in hiding, unable to go to work. What have we done? We've helped them by paying for their bills so that they can stay in hiding. They don't have to go outside and put themselves at risk. And there's publicity. Here we have the wonderful Wole Soyinka, who wrote a letter to Mubarak Balak on his 100th day in detention. Unfortunately, these words are as important now as they were then, because Mubarak remains in prison. But we will continue to campaign on his behalf until he is released. What is our approach? I'd like to call it a coordinated response, and let me talk you through it just a little bit. We receive a request for help. Usually this is from the individual themselves, but it might end up being from a friend or family member. They request help. They say to us, oh, help me, I am stuck in this country, I need to flee. My job is then to establish the facts, to clarify all of the details, and to assess their needs. This is the bit that takes a really long time, and I'm sure it's incredibly frustrating for the individual. It's incredibly frustrating for me and any of our members who we are working with in order to work on these cases. But it's really important that we do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. When we intervene, are often intervening with government officials or the United Nations, and we have to make sure that the information we're providing is accurate. So my job is to verify, to look at the evidence, to look at where the holes are. Once I've worked out whether we can help and how we might be able to help, I discuss it with them. We develop a plan of action together of how we can support them. Then we provide that support, and where necessary, coordinate with our members and other organizations in providing that support. And we continue in this loop where we continue having communication, checking in on them, checking in with our partners to see what's going on, to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing and that it's helping. If not, do we need to change our approach? Has something changed in their situation? And the cycle continues. Then I need to establish new facts. I need to go back for consent. We work on a principle of informed consent. We won't do something without someone's consent. It's so essential for individuals who have faced persecution to have control, to have agency over their own lives and their own strategy for their own safety. So that is what we do. So how have we helped? Well, unsurprisingly, relocation has been only 3% of what we've been able to do in the last year. However, we have provided a great deal of advice to individuals who are seeking asylum or seeking to relocate, and on what they can do in the interim for their own security, who they could reach out to, who might be able to help them, who's in a better position to help them. Solidarity, networking has been a huge part of the work that we've done, as well as our emergency grants and asylum support. So taking a look at the emergency grants a little closer, 67% of what we have spent, of the £25,000 or so that we have spent since June of last year, has gone on living costs, on bills for those who are in hiding. Legal fees is another cost that we've spent money on, and that's largely for asylum claims, where individuals have been trying to appeal their claim. Medical costs is another. And there's a small amount of relocation there where it has been possible, largely internal relocation, where it's been absolutely vital for their own security. In terms of asylum and resettlement and the work we've done there, we have still done some work. We've worked with 12 individuals on their asylum or resettlement. They've come from a range of different countries that you can see there, 5 of whom are now finally safe, although there may still be yet a long road ahead for them to be truly cemented in where they are, either in part of a community or to have all of their rights. 2 await final decisions on their fate and face the imminent possibility of deportation. And 5 are stuck in potentially life-threatening situations. So I continue to monitor those cases incredibly closely. And lastly, what we have done is raise public awareness about cases of concern. Here you can see members across the globe coming together on behalf of Mubarak Bala. I want to talk to you about a few positive outcomes, if I may. I have a few minutes left, so I will. Firstly, we have Gulalai, who we have heard from earlier today. Gulalai was detained on her way home from a board meeting. And we, within minutes, were able to start collecting all of the information necessary in order to inform the right people to ensure her safety. And she was eventually able to announce that she was safe and outside of Pakistan. In the middle here, we have a blogger and human rights defender from Mauritania, Sheikh Ould Mohammed Maketa, who was in 2014 sentenced to death for apostasy. It was a real struggle for him to get legal assistance. No one wanted to take on his case because of the risk to their own lives that posed. We did a lot of back channel, behind the scenes lobbying to pressure Mauritania into releasing him. And he is now free. He is now out of the country. Then we have Mahmoud Jama Ahmed, who is a Somali professor, who is one of the cases who got stuck, actually, when he was trying to flee. He was accused of blasphemy and imprisoned. And when he was released following a pardon in 2020, there was still a public outcry for him to be killed. So he had to flee with his wife and his children. And just as he did to a second country, not the end safe country, lockdown hit. Borders closed and he was stuck and he had to go back into hiding. So we, together with a number of other organizations, have helped support him in his time of need, both in terms of financial support, but also in terms of supporting his own approaches to securing his safe resettlement. He is now also safely resettled, but he is beginning the long process of claiming asylum, and we will be continuing to support him in this. Finally, I just want to say one thing, and that is that change takes time, but we do see change. We've seen case of Shaktika Sathkumara dropped. We've seen the Scottish government make amendments to repeal blasphemy. We've seen the High Court in Abuja rule in favour of Mubarak Bala. We've seen the Norwegian government change its guidelines to support individuals at risk who, as a result of their non-belief. And most recently, we have seen Mohmad finally be granted asylum in Greece. And before we open up to questions, I have one question for you. Are you with us? In order to do this work, we need your help. It, as you can understand, takes money and resources to do it. Any donation, however small, will go towards our work to support individuals at risk. Thank you.